Welcome, everyone. This week's deep dive takes us into the Seventh-day Adventist Cornerstone Connection lesson for the Sabbath of March 8th. We'll be exploring a familiar story, Jesus' first miracle at the wedding in Cana, but looking at what it reveals about celebrating with Jesus. Before we jump in, though, why don't we start with a quick prayer?
Sounds good.
Dear God, thank you for the chance to explore your word. Open our hearts and minds to the deeper meaning and joy you want us to find. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so this week's lesson is titled Celebrating with Jesus. That title really grabbed my attention. It hints at a different side of Jesus than we usually think about.
For sure. And the synopsis jumps right into that, showing how the miracle at Cana reveals Jesus' love for us, how he wants to be in those happy times with us, and how he has the power to turn even normal things into something really amazing.
I love that. Sometimes we get so focused on the serious parts of faith that we forget how much Jesus wanted us to have abundant life. And that means having times of pure joy and celebration, too. Before we get to the story itself, what's this lesson hoping to do? What are its goals?
This lesson has three main targets. First, it wants us to see how God actually enjoys our celebrations. Second, to make us feel comfortable celebrating alongside Jesus. And then finally, to encourage us to invite him into our lives, not as some far-off figure, but as a close friend who's there for the good times and the bad.
That's a really profound idea, recognizing that God wants to be part of our happy times. The key text for this week is John chapter 2, verse 11. This, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. It seems so simple, but there's so much depth there.
Absolutely. And to help us understand the importance of this miracle even better, the flashlight section gives us a quote from The Desire of Ages. Jesus did not begin his ministry by some great work before the Sanhedrin at Jerusalem. At a household gathering in a little Galilean village, his power was put forth to add to the joy of a wedding feast. Thus, he showed his sympathy with men and his desire to minister to their happiness. In the wilderness of temptation, he himself had drunk the cup of woe. He came forth to give to men the cup of blessing by his benediction to hallow the relations of human life.
That passage is so beautiful. It really highlights Jesus' compassion and desire to bring joy into people's lives. After everything he went through in the wilderness, it's amazing that his first public act was to be part of this joyful occasion and make it even more special. Speaking of that, the lesson asks us this really interesting question. If Jesus came to a celebration with me and my friends, I would. What do you think when you hear that question?
Oh, that is thought-provoking. I think I'd be a little nervous, honestly. But aside from that, I'd want to make sure he felt welcome and comfortable. I wouldn't want to put on a show for him, just genuinely share that joy of the moment together.
I feel the same way. That leads us right into the Did You Know section, which sheds some light on what celebration means from a biblical viewpoint. It points out that the Sabbath and marriage are two of God's original gifts to humanity, specifically made to bring us joy, rest, and a sense of belonging.
It's fascinating because these gifts weren't random additions. They were God's finishing touch to creation, like the peak of all the exceedingly good things he'd made. It shows how much he wanted us to have joy and connection, not just as individuals, but as a community.
I hadn't considered it that way before. Makes you see that Sabbath and marriage aren't about rules or restrictions, but about experiencing the full life God intended for us. But let's shift gears now from these big ideas to the story itself, the wedding at Cana.
Let's look at John chapter 2. Verses 1 through 11.
Okay, so imagine this. A busy wedding celebration going on in Cana. Jesus, his mother Mary, and the disciples are there enjoying everything. Then all of a sudden, there's a problem. They're out of wine.
Oh, no. Can you imagine how embarrassed the host must have been? All those whispers and disappointing guests. What a disaster. And right then, Mary turns to Jesus. I'm always amazed by her quiet confidence, her total faith that he can somehow fix this.
So much is happening in just those few verses. We see the potential crisis, the subtle conversation between Mary and Jesus, and then her straightforward instruction to the servants. Whatever he tells you, do it.
And what happens next is just a pure miracle. Jesus tells the servants to fill these 6 huge stone jars with water, the kind used for Jewish purification rituals. They fill them up, then, following Jesus' directions, they draw some out and bring it to the person in charge of the feast.
And here comes the best part. The guy running the feast, having no idea what just went down, is totally blown away by how good this wine is. He tells the bridegroom, everybody serves the best wine first, and then the cheaper stuff after people have had a lot to drink. But you've saved the best for last.
It's just pure shock and delight. And for the disciples, this is a turning point in their belief. They've seen firsthand how Jesus can transform something ordinary into something amazing.
This story has so many layers. The lesson encourages us to explore it further with some thought-provoking questions in the out of the story section. I'm a bit puzzled by why Jesus chose a wedding for his very first miracle, though. Seems a kind of an odd choice for such a momentous occasion, especially coming right after his time in the wilderness. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. It seems like a pretty normal setting for something so extraordinary, but maybe that's the whole point. Like, Jesus is showing us that his ministry, and by extension God's care, isn't just for those huge, awe-inspiring events. It's about everyday moments, those seemingly normal celebrations in our lives.
That's a really interesting take. It makes you rethink what's considered sacred versus secular. It's like Jesus is saying, I'm not just here for the big miracles and dramatic pronouncements. I'm here for the simple joys, those shared moments of connection and celebration, too.
Exactly. And remember, Jewish weddings were really significant social events. By doing his first miracle there, Jesus wasn't just solving a wine shortage. He was publicly saying that community is important, celebrating life together is important. It's almost a divine seal of approval on these happy gatherings.
That makes so much sense. But here's another thing that I find confusing. Jesus tells Mary, my hour has not yet come, but then he does the miracle anyway. What do you think he meant when he said that? And why did he go ahead with it?
That's a great question. It suggests that even though Jesus had a divine plan, a timeline, what he called his hour, he was also really sensitive to the needs and faith of the people around him. He wasn't stuck to some rigid script.
So it's not that God is unpredictable. It's that he's willing to respond to our needs, even our faith, even if it means changing his plans. That's reassuring, but also humbling.
Exactly. It reminds us that God isn't some far-off, unfeeling being. He's a loving Father who's involved in our lives, responding to our needs and faith in ways we may not always get.
Now, this next question is about Mary's role in the story. She tells the servants to do whatever he tells you, even after Jesus at first hints that he's not going to step in. Why do you think she had such complete confidence in him?
It points to how deep their relationship was. Mary seems to just get Jesus's character and power. It's like she's gently pushing him, saying, I know you, and I know you won't let these people down.
It's like she's reminding him of who he is. It says so much about her faith. She doesn't question or argue. She just trusts. This whole exchange makes me think about how I pray. Do I have that same unshakable trust? Or am I full of doubts and conditions?
That's a good question for us all to consider, but let's move on. The lesson also asks us to think about how Jesus, being at the wedding, blessed the idea of marriage itself. What are your thoughts on that?
It feels like he's making a statement by choosing this event for his first public miracle. Almost like he's saying, look, I'm here at this joyful celebration of love and commitment, and I'm going to do something incredible to make it even more special.
Exactly. It takes our understanding of marriage beyond just a contract or agreement. It's a sacred union, a picture of God's love for humanity, a symbol of something much bigger.
Such a beautiful way to look at it. And I like how this goes back to what we talked about earlier, about marriage being one of God's original gifts. It reinforces that idea that marriage isn't about rules, but about living the full life God wanted us to have.
Absolutely. It reminds us that marriage, at its best, reflects the love and commitment between Christ and his church, a wonderful picture of unity and devotion.
That's a profound thought. And speaking of profound, the last question in this section asks us to consider, how did this miracle show Jesus' glory? It's a simple question, but it gets to the core of who Jesus is and why he came.
This miracle, in such an ordinary setting, gave us a peek into Jesus' divine nature. It wasn't just about making wine. It was about his control over the natural world, his compassion for our needs, and his desire to bring joy even into the most basic human celebrations.
I never thought of it that way. It challenges me to look beyond the surface of the miracle and see what it says about Jesus' character and what matters to him.
It reminds us that God's glory isn't always in the huge, earth-shattering events. Sometimes it's in the quiet moments, in simple acts of love and compassion, in turning something ordinary into something extraordinary.
You've given me a lot to think about. But before we dive too deeply into those reflections, let's go through the out-of-the-story questions one by one, offering some extra insights to our listeners. The first one was, why do you think Jesus chose to perform his first miracle at a wedding?
That question has been discussed for centuries. But to me, it comes down to the fact that Jesus came to be part of every part of human life, not just the sad or spiritual parts. His being at the wedding and his willingness to do a miracle there shows that he enjoys our happiness as much as he comforts us in our sadness. It's a beautiful picture of his love and care.
I think that's a helpful way to see this miracle. It challenges us to see God not as distant and detached, but as a loving friend who wants to be in every part of our lives.
Exactly. It also shows how important community and celebration are in the Christian life. We're not supposed to go through life alone. We're supposed to share our joys and sorrows, just like Jesus shared in the joy of that wedding in Cana.
Okay, the second question was about Jesus saying his hour had not yet come, even though he did perform the miracle. That one really confused me. What do you make of this seeming contradiction?
It's a really good question. It suggests that while Jesus had a divine plan, he was also incredibly flexible and responsive to the needs and faith of those around him. He saw a real human need, a social disaster even, and he responded with compassion and power.
So even with the big picture in mind, he was willing to step in and meet the immediate needs of those around him. It reminds me of that verse in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. We get so caught up in our own timelines and expectations that we forget God has a perfect plan, even if it doesn't unfold how we expect.
Precisely. It's about letting go of our limited understanding and trusting God's wisdom and timing. And this applies to everything, not just miracles. We can trust God is working, even when we can't see it, and he'll bring about his perfect will eventually.
The third question was about Mary's role. She seems to know intuitively that Jesus will act, even though he initially says his hour hasn't come. What does this tell us about their relationship, and what can we learn from her example?
It shows a deep level of trust and understanding between them. Mary doesn't question or doubt, she just trusts his power and compassion. It's a great example of the kind of faith we should all aim for, a faith that's rooted in a deep personal relationship with Jesus and a confidence in his goodness and power.
It's like she's challenging him to be true to himself. And by doing so, she's also acting as an advocate for those in need. What an example of how faith can move mountains.
It's a reminder that we're not just watching God's plan unfold. We can and should actively participate through our prayers, actions, and unwavering faith.
You know, I think you've opened up a whole new way of thinking about prayer. It's not just about presenting our wish list to God, but about aligning our hearts with his will and trusting him to work through us. But for now, let's move on to the next question, which focuses on how Jesus, being at the wedding, blessed the institution of marriage itself.
It was a public affirmation of marriage as a sacred covenant, started by God and showing his love for us. By choosing this setting for his first public miracle, Jesus was making a strong statement about the importance of marriage.
I love that. It's like he's saying, I'm not just here to perform miracles. I'm here to bless and uphold the very core of human society, starting with family and marriage.
It's about God's presence being woven into every part of our lives, even the joyful celebrations that mark our big moments in relationships.
And finally, let's address that last question. How did this miracle reveal Jesus' glory? It's such a simple question, but it gets right to the heart of who Jesus is and what he came to do.
This miracle, done in such a normal setting, gave us a glimpse into Jesus' divine nature. It wasn't just water into wine. It was about showing his power over nature, his willingness to meet our needs, and his desire to bring joy to the world. But even more than that, it showed his heart, his compassion, his love for us.
It's like he's saying, I'm not just a powerful God. I'm a God who cares about your happiness, who wants to celebrate with you, who wants to bring joy into your life.
It's a beautiful picture of God's love. And this miracle challenges us to look deeper, to see the deeper meaning in everyday things. It reminds us that God is working in our lives all the time, often in the simplest, most unexpected places.
This has been such a rich conversation. We've barely scratched the surface of this incredible story, and I feel like I already understand Jesus and his desire to celebrate with us so much better. But before we move on to the illustration section, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this idea that even ordinary moments can have God's glory woven into them. It really connects to the next section, illustration, doesn't it? We have this story about Corrie ten Boom's mother.
Yeah, it does. This story is such a strong example of how God's love can shine through even when things are tough. Corrie ten Boom's mother, even though she was paralyzed by a stroke, never stopped caring for people with incredible love and compassion.
What's really inspiring about her story is that she didn't let her physical limitations stop her from serving others or showing God's love.
Exactly. And the lesson cleverly connects this story to Global Youth Day. It's like a little nudge reminding us that we're all called to share God's love, no matter our age or what we're going through.
Such a good point. Global Youth Day gives young people this amazing chance to live out their faith, helping their communities, and sharing the joy of knowing Jesus in practical ways.
It's a great reminder that we're not supposed to keep our faith hidden. It's meant to be shared, shown through actions of love, compassion, and service.
It's about taking that joy we feel with Jesus and spreading it out, changing the world around us one kind act at a time.
Let's move on to the further insights section now, where we go deeper into the meaning of marriage in the Bible. There's this one quote that I found really striking. A Jewish marriage was an impressive occasion, and its joy was not displeasing to the Son of Man. By attending this feast, Jesus honored marriage as a divine institution. In both the Old and the New Testament, the marriage relation is employed to represent the tender and sacred union that exists between Christ and his people.
That quote really elevates our understanding of marriage. It's not just a contract between two people. It points to something deeper, something spiritual, the union between Christ and his church.
It reminds us that marriage, when it's living up to its ideal, is like a reflection of God's love for us. It's a covenant, a promise, a journey of two people becoming one, just as Christ and his church are united in love and purpose.
It's a beautiful picture of God's plan for humanity woven into the very beginning of creation.
So as we get near the end of our exploration, let's take a quick look back at the main points from this week's lesson.
The central message seems to be about how much Jesus wants to be part of our lives, not just a distant figure we worship, but a friend who's there for our joys and celebrations. It challenges us to break down those walls we build between sacred and secular, and to invite him into everything we do.
It's also a call to action, encouraging us to follow Jesus' example by showing his love and grace to others, especially through things like Global Youth Day.
It's about being Jesus' hands and feet, sharing his joy, and transforming our communities one act of kindness at a time.
And as we wrap up, the outro asks us a final question to think about. What needs to be transformed in your life today? How can you make space for Jesus in every aspect of your life, from celebrations to service?
This question really makes us look at our hearts and what's important to us. It's a call to live with purpose, to align our actions with what we believe, and to make room for Jesus in every corner of our lives, not just on Sabbath, but every single day.
It's about letting our faith become part of the rhythm of our lives, allowing Jesus to change us from the inside out, and use us to spread his love and grace in the world.
It's a beautiful challenge, and I hope we all take it to heart as we go through our week. But before we sign off, let's look at the apply section, where we get to take what we've learned and think about how to actually live it out.
The first question in this section asks, what did you learn about Jesus in this study that changed how you see him? What really stood out to you? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
For me, it's that reminder that Jesus isn't some distant, emotionless figure. He's a God who enjoys our happiness, who wants to be part of our good times, who wants to experience life with us to the fullest. That's a very personal, intimate picture of Jesus that really resonated with me.
That's a beautiful insight, and it fits right in with the next question, which asks, how does knowing that God celebrates with us change your perception of him? That one really struck me.
Me too. So often we imagine God as a strict judge, always looking for our mistakes and ready to punish us. But this idea that he actually celebrates with us, enjoys our happiness, wants to be part of our good times, it's so freeing.
It's a reminder that God isn't just holy and just. He's also loving, compassionate, and deeply invested in our well-being. He's a God who wants us to experience true joy and share that joy with others.
It makes me want to approach God not out of fear or duty, but out of love and thankfulness. Knowing he's happy when I'm happy makes me want to bring him glory in everything I do, especially my celebrations.
Now, this next question gets practical. How can we invite Jesus into our celebrations, parties, and other events in a way that feels natural and real? Sometimes I think we overthink this, trying to make it more complicated than it needs to be.
I agree. It's not about turning every party into a church service. It's about having a heart that acknowledges God's presence in everything and inviting him into all areas of our lives, even the seemingly ordinary ones.
It's about starting with gratitude, recognizing that all good things come from him. It's about creating an atmosphere of love, kindness, and respect where everyone feels welcome and appreciated. And it's about making choices that honor God and show his values.
It's about finding that balance between enjoying life and making sure our celebrations line up with our faith and values.
The next question challenges us to think about how we can actually transform our celebrations to reflect Jesus' love. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it starts with why we're doing it. Why are we throwing this party or going to this event? Is it just to impress people or boost our egos? Or is it because we truly want to share joy, build community, and create a space where people feel loved and accepted?
That's such an important place to start. Our intentions matter. When our hearts are in the right place, it naturally shows up in our actions and choices. It's also about making thoughtful decisions. The music, the food, the activities, are these things creating a positive, uplifting atmosphere?
It's about asking ourselves, would Jesus feel at ease and welcome at this celebration? Would he approve of what we're doing and how we're behaving? Not in a legalistic way, but as a guide for creating an environment that honors God and shows his love.
The last question in this section is a personal one. What's one thing you will change about how you celebrate to better show Christ's love for others? What stands out to you as you consider this?
For me, it's about being more deliberate about inviting people who might be lonely or feel left out. It's about reaching out in friendship and welcoming those who maybe don't have many social connections.
That's a beautiful goal. It's like reflecting the heart of Jesus, who always went out of his way to connect with those who were marginalized, the outcasts, the forgotten.
It's about ensuring everyone feels loved and valued, just as Christ loves and values each one of us.
And that brings us to the end of the apply section. We've explored some thought-provoking and practical ways to bring this lesson to life in our daily lives. But the journey doesn't stop there. Let's move on to the share section, where we're challenged to go beyond applying it to ourselves and think about how to share this message with others.
This section is a great reminder that our faith isn't meant to be kept secret. It's meant to be shared. We're supposed to be like ambassadors for Christ, spreading the good news and inviting others to find the joy and change that comes from knowing him.
The first question in this section asks, how can we make Global Youth Day a celebration of Jesus and his love for us? What are your first thoughts on that?
Global Youth Day is all about young people coming together to serve their communities and share God's love in tangible ways. I think to make it a real celebration of Jesus, we need to make sure our hearts are in the right place. Are we doing it because we truly want to serve and share God's love, or are we just going through the motions?
You hit the nail on the head. It's all about the motivation behind the action. I also think we need to be aware of the message we're sending. Are we just doing good deeds to make ourselves look good? Or are we really trying to show Jesus' love and compassion?
It's about going beyond just doing good deeds and really connecting with people, sharing the hope and joy that come from knowing Jesus.
The next question asks us to think about how to share our joy in Jesus in a way that's appealing and inviting to others. What are your thoughts?
Sometimes I think we as Christians get so caught up in rules and regulations that we forget that the heart of the gospel is a message of joy, hope, and freedom. We need to share that in a way that's real, relatable, and brings life.
Absolutely. We need to show people that a relationship with Jesus isn't about restrictions and burdens. It's about experiencing a fullness of life we could never find on our own. It's about letting our light shine, not by preaching at people, but by living our faith in a way that draws them in.
It's about being the kind of people that others want to be around, not because we're perfect or have it all figured out, but because we have a joy and peace that can only come from knowing Jesus.
Sometimes the best way to share our faith is just to be there for people, listening to their struggles, offering a helping hand, showing them they're loved and valued.
It's about meeting people where they are, loving them without conditions, and pointing them towards the one who can truly satisfy their deepest longings.
The last question in this section is straightforward. What will you do this week to share your joy with others? I'm really interested to hear what you come up with.
For me, I think it's about being more intentional about looking for chances to share my faith in a natural, genuine way. It doesn't need to be anything big or showy. Maybe it's just inviting a friend to church, telling a story about how God has worked in my life, or just being more open about my beliefs in everyday conversations.
Those are great ways to share the joy of knowing Jesus. And it doesn't have to be complicated. Sometimes a simple act of kindness, a listening ear, a word of encouragement, those things can make a huge difference in someone's life.
It makes me think of that quote by Mother Teresa. Not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love.
And with that, we come to the end of the share section. We've explored so many ideas and inspiration for how to live out our faith and share the joy of Jesus. But before we finish this episode, there's one last section, challenge.
Oh yes, the challenge section. Always a little bit scary, but also really exciting. It's where we get a concrete task to put what we've learned into practice.
This week's challenge is a really interesting one. It asks us to think about this. How does understanding that Jesus turned water into wine at a wedding feast encourage you to trust him with the ordinary details of your everyday life?
That's a fascinating connection. It's easy to look at a miracle like turning water into wine and think, wow, that's incredible, but what does that have to do with me? This challenge makes us bridge that gap.
Exactly. It's about realizing that the same God who did that amazing miracle is also present in the normal, everyday parts of our lives. He cares about our struggles, our joys, our hopes, our fears, and he wants us to trust him with every part of who we are.
It's a reminder that God isn't just a God of the spectacular,
Right.
but also a God of the ordinary, the everyday, the seemingly insignificant. He's inviting us to work with him in everything we do.
So how does this challenge speak to you? How does this miracle at Cana encourage you to trust God with the simple, everyday things in your life?
I often catch myself worrying about the future, stressing about things I can't control. But this challenge reminds me that God is in control, even when my life feels messy and unpredictable. It encourages me to let go of my anxiety and trust that he'll work everything out for my good.
That's beautiful. It's about giving our fears and worries to God and letting him lead us through every season of life.
It's about remembering that even when things seem ordinary, God is working, weaving his love and grace into our lives.
And it's not just about trusting him with the big things. It's also about the small, seemingly insignificant details. He cares about it all.
It's about recognizing his presence in every moment, every conversation, every situation, and trusting him to guide us, provide for us, and make everything work together for good.
So as we think about this challenge, consider this. What are some specific areas of your life where you need to let go of control and trust God more? What are some practical steps you can take to invite him into the everyday parts of your day?
Those are important questions to think about as we go through our week. Because in the end, it's in the seemingly mundane, those everyday moments, that our faith is truly tested and refined.
It's in those moments that we learn to rely on God's grace, to see his faithfulness in action, and to grow in our understanding of his love and power.
And as we do, we'll find that even the most ordinary moments can become something extraordinary.
With that thought, I think we can wrap up this deep dive into the Seventh-day Adventist Cornerstone Connection lesson for the Sabbath of March 8th. It's been a meaningful and enriching journey.
It has. I hope you've been inspired and encouraged to celebrate life with Jesus, to trust him with everything, and to share his joy with the world.
Until next time, may you experience the fullness of his love and grace in every part of your life.
It's really amazing how even a story we've heard before, like the wedding at Cana, can show us so much when we take the time to really think about it.
It is. It really shows how rich the scriptures are. God keeps speaking to us through his word, even in those stories we think we already know.
This deep dive has definitely given us a lot to think about, not just about how we celebrate, but also how we live out our faith in a way that's appealing and inviting to others.
Yeah, it's about sharing the joy and love of Jesus in a real, authentic way that can actually change people.
Exactly. And on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this episode.
Before we do, let's leave our listener with one last thought, something we didn't talk about directly in the lesson, but that builds on what we've discussed.
I like that idea. Something to spark their curiosity and get them thinking even more.
Okay, here it is. If Jesus were to come to one of your celebrations today, what would he see? Would he see a reflection of his love, his joy, his grace, or would he see something else?
Wow, that's a powerful question. It really makes us look inward, to examine our hearts and our motives. It's a reminder that celebrating isn't just about having fun. It's about honoring God and reflecting his character.
It's about creating a space where people can feel his presence, where his love can flow freely, and where others can get a glimpse of his joy and grace.
What a beautiful challenge. I hope it's one we all take to heart.
And on that note, let's bring this deep dive to a close.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. We hope you feel inspired and encouraged to celebrate life with Jesus, both now and in the future.
Until next time, may you experience the fullness of his joy and grace in everything you do.